Hello, welcome to Deeper Delve, Emperor Marcosta Kordaava. So it's no secret that Kordaava is assassinated basically right at the beginning of our story. It actually happens in chapter 3 is the first time that somebody hears, that the characters hear the Emperor is dead. But from then on, the whole premise of our story is what happens after this big event. Emperor Kordaava, he was a guy that he did not inherit the empire. Emperor Kordaava took over Chaldea. There was no empire before him. He came out of nowhere and forged this empire that ruled all of Chaldea for 40 years. And then suddenly he's mysteriously assassinated.
Yeah, his death has an effect on everybody. He has a lot of influence in life, and it turns out he has a lot of influence in death. Each one of our characters come from a different place in the world, society, kingdoms, and his death affects each one of them differently. We start off with Yo, and you're like, well, here's Yo, who's comes from a abusive family, father, and he's living on the street, and how possibly could his life, could Kordaava's death affect his life? Well, it does, but it's a little slowly at first. He's not quite sure how it happens. Other people, it's right away. Ricewitz, he's our window into our military. And of course, when Emperor Kordaava dies, immediately knows, especially with Niche and the orcs, that, that the world is going to be unrest coming soon. Zane has a pretty profound effect right away as well. And he's in college. He's partying. He happens to be one of those party animals. Is like, any excuse to throw a party. And he's a college student. So he's like, let's go out and we show a pub crawl. And of course, his story starts off at the University of Dorseng, where it's also in the city. It's called the Free City of Esh. And then there's freedom of religion. But with Kordaava's death, a bunch of the religious people are like, whoo, we can really now, spread our religion around the world. And I don't want to give away too much. We haven't gotten to this part yet, but other people, Church of Set, don't take too kindly to freedom of religion. Marco also has a pretty profound effect on him almost immediately, being as, the first newspaper in the world. There's no bigger story than the Emperor's dead. And then, of course, bringing other stories about how the ramifications of his death, bringing that to light. Sarva, sort of less so. She starts off creating her own sort of story, trying to assassinate Eltani, and she escapes and goes on the lam and ends up going to Ogstad, which just happens to be the same city where Ricewitz and Yo happen to be. I wonder why that happened. Did I miss anybody? Anyway, the point being is no matter, him dying affects everybody. And that's really sort of the starting point for all these different stories is how does the Kordaava's death affect them?
That's right. And there's a certain amount of mystery as to how Kordaava dies. We are not going to come out and explain that right away. In season 2, we are going to have a lead character that's introduced named Sybil, and her story arc will be to try to get to the bottom of it. But the people in Chaldea don't know how he died. They don't know who killed him. He's found impaled by the spirit of Set to his throne, and so it becomes a big part of the story. Not only what happens to the Empire after he's died, but how did he die? Who shall we blame? Somebody obviously should be in deep trouble over this.
In our last video we talked about the Drowsildar and how badass they are and how they have super senses and nobody can get by them. And there's a reason why, we talk about how badass the Drowsildar are first, and we talk about how Kordaava had 20 of them surrounding him in court. And then he gets assassinated. Okay. Wow. Okay. Somebody out there is able to get by 20.
If you get the idea that we're lying to you, after in one episode we tell you the Drowsildar are the apex predator, nobody can outdo the Drowsildar, and then the Emperor was guarded by them and he dies. Yeah, but don't trust everything we say too much. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about Kordaava's origins. So What is the history of this guy? So, because before he came along, Chaldea was just that war. It was called the Dark Times for like 1,000 years since the Clawhammer War. Chaldea kingdoms come and go, fighting each other, dogs and cats living together. You know the drill. And then this guy Kordaava comes along. So Kordaava is his parents are he's multi-ethnic for one thing. His father is of Chaldee origin from the kingdom of Somatian, which is sort of a Middle Eastern sort of kingdom and peoples. His father, Cyron, immigrated to excuse me, immigrated to Hesse and married Leshka Kordaava. The emperor's last name is from his mother's side of the family. Leshka is Hessian. So Marcosta was their only son. So he's half Middle Eastern, half Hessian. He was, he was, as you might expect, a strong, adventurous, boisterous young lad, oozing with enough testosterone and driven with enthusiasm to fill 10 boys his age. He was adventurous. He was like an adrenaline junkie. He would go adventuring in the nearby Garnon Forest, which is an enchanted forest of Chaldea, and he would. That was how he spent his teenage years. And while he was adventuring in the Garnon Forest, he met Holsan. Now, Holsan was a priest of Set, or would become one, and the two of them, as young lads, gravers, became best friends, and some of their early adventures are quite legendary. So
the story of Yo, his buddy, is Arion, and in a soon-to-come chapter, he also follows sort of in the footsteps of Kordaava and Holsan, where Yo and Arion also go adventuring into the Garnon Forest. So in Ogstad, that's definitely the place to go if you're going to want to be a graver and go on serious adventures. So there was a number of years where Kordaava was adventuring with his buddy Holsan in the Garnon Forest. How long that was? Roughly 3-4 years, maybe 5 years, who's to say. And we'd come and go, but there was a period of time where he disappeared, where, I don't know, did he get caught somewhere, or was he actually just busy? Some people thought that maybe, historians thinking maybe he was in Samaria in the Mountains of Chaos, or he's off killing dragons in Perrin or something. Some historians believe that he was actually in the Garnon near the swamp of Cone. There were rumors that he was seen in Tartu, sometimes hanging out with the rangers there. There's a huge exposed root of the Yggdrasil tree there. And supposedly if you go underneath that root, you could disappear into the Garnon to the clearings and who knows what. Kordaava was also a big fan of the Enumians and boasted of collecting a lot of the Enumian fate cards. Supposedly he's got some of his full decks on display in his library back in Saratov, and any extras he had on his person. The reason why I mention that is because, he hinted at, when he came out of those lost years, he came out with the Spear of Set, and people were like, well, where did the Spear of Set come from? And he never outright said. At one point he said, that's between me and my God. But he did say it was a result of going on a quest. And people were like, well, what kind of quest? Well, was it a quest with the Church of Set, being as Holsan was an acolyte of Set? Or more likely, if he was really enamored with Enumians, he probably went on an Enumian quest. And the result of that, he came out with the Spear of Set. Regardless, he came out of the Garnon, or came out away from adventuring with the Spear of Set, which became his hallmark weapon of choice.
So, at some point with Kordaava out gallivanting all over the place, his family, which were a noble family, finally decided, we need to channel this boy's efforts. And so they pulled some strings, and had Kordaava enlisted in the Contubernium. The Contubernium is a military school. I always like the idea of a military school, like a West Point or something. And it's in Latium, which is our Roman-inspired kingdom. And so Kordaava was enrolled in the Contubernium, And this marked a change from being sort of a graver adventurer type character into being more of a military person. It settled him down in a lot of ways. And he it's kind of known as the place in Chaldea for military families. Now, of course, this is pre-empire, so all the different countries, a lot of them fight each other, don't like each other necessarily, but kind of worldwide across Chaldea, there is this thing of like, oh, if you have a promising young lad, get him enrolled in the Contubernium. And so Kordaava did this, and he graduated number one in his class, and got the best military training that you can get, and learn. He took to this military life like a fish to water.
Yeah, I bet. You hear all the time, or like some troubled kid, can't stay out of trouble, so his parents go, "I'm going to send you off to military school." You could just totally see this, right? Kordaava comes back adventuring. His parents say, "You know what? You're not even going to make it to your 20th year at this rate." And like you said, pulled some strings and sent him off to school. And of course, being who he is, he does like, wow, this is great.
Yeah.
He loves the structure. That was a thing that he loved, right? So much was like just the military structure was great. Sort of tickled his ability to keep things organized.
Well, and just like what happens in our world, when the top colleges in our world, businesses come and recruit from the top graduates of the best schools for their businesses. The same thing happens in Chaldea. Various ambassadors of various religions around Chaldea come and get to know who the top members of the graduating class are each year. And Marcosta Kordaava was recruited by a neighbor of Latium from the kingdom of Roosh, by another man another young man who would become an important figure in Kordaava's life. And that was Boguslav Tiomir, the Grand Prince of Roosh. And Tiomir recruited Kordaava to join his military. And Kordaava was very keen on this idea because Tiomir had ambitions of conquest. If you're a military man like Kordaava was, you don't want to just go to some military that's good and play defense. And so immediately, Tiomir brought Kordaava in as part of the officer staff and explained to him that they were going to attack the country to their north called Kazakhstan. And they did so. And over the coming 2 years, there was a campaign, and they won. And during the course of these 2 years, Kordaava performed very well on the battlefield, like a young Napoleon, if you will, and rose up through the ranks. And by the time that war was over, Kordaava was in charge of the military of Roosh and the subjugated militaries of Kazakhstan.
When he was going to graduate, top of his class, sort of like the NFL, it's like you get these top recruits coming from college football into the NFL. Who's going to get first pick? And of course, Hesse, and his parents are from Hesse. They're thinking, the knights from Augsburg are thinking, well, he'll come back here and join up with our military. But it's like, yeah, there's nothing going on there. If you have dreams of conquest, I'm not going back to Hesse. Sorry, I'm going to the number one contender. And so that's why he ended up staying close by in Roosh, which is very close to where the war college was at. So here's Kordaava. He comes out of this organized Contubernium, sort of Romanesque style military school, and ends up going over to Roosh and working with them for a couple of years. Doesn't he decide that he's going to rebuild their army from the ground up with this new structure that he prefers?
Yeah, he had to prove himself first and get enough credibility and respect from the other officers. But Kordaava is a great leader, very charismatic. He's one of those type of people that other people gravitate towards, and So yes, once he proved himself, he convinced Tiamir that they really should have their military organized like the Latins had theirs organized. And so he worked to get the military of Bruges and reorganized. And then he went and proposed to Tiamir that for their next campaign, they should think bigger and that they should ally with Latium and take on the entire continent of Tamika, which was a bold endeavor. And Tiamir said, well, if you can talk Latium into that sounds great. So here Kordaava takes on the role of an ambassador, a deal maker. He goes back to Latium, which is where the Contaburnium is. So he knows quite a few people there. He made impressions. And of course, you can just imagine that people who had trained him were excited about his military success. So he proposed to Latium this alliance between Rus and Latium to take over Tamika, and convinced Latium that was a good idea. And so it was. And that started the next campaign, which was successful. Latium and Rus ended up taking over the entire continent.
Yeah, we're only going into Poland. It's okay. Just going into Poland.
Yeah. Well, there's steps along the way. I mean, everybody watching this knows that he's going to become emperor. So, yeah, okay. I wonder if it worked. Yeah, that worked. All right, what's next? And as before, by the time that this army had taken over the entire continent of Tamika, the Kordaava was in charge of the combined armies of both Latium and Rus.
So let's talk Drazeldar. So this is where things get a little fog of war-ish, a little sketchy on what actually happened here. So long about this time, here's Kordaava. He's marching around, taking over the continent, being very successful. Some other kingdoms are getting nervous. One kingdom decides that they're going to hire one of these legendary Doomkarian assassins to come after him. Another kingdom hides a graver adventurer to raid against him. And of course, in both situations, he survives. But even Kordaava gets a bit nervous going, wow, okay, he doesn't want to be assassinated, which is kind of ironic. So he disappears for a short period of time. And the next thing you know, he's marching in front of an army of giants, the Drazeldar, and he's attacking the city of Juba. And that's weird because his army is somewhere else entirely. And Juba is very close to the northern border of the Garnon, and also very close to the swamp of Cone. A lot of people historians believe that the Drazeldar were from the swamp of Cone. And this led more evidence to that being so close. So here come the Drazeldar, and they just walk right over the city of Juba, and just it's like a typhoon coming through, and so much the rest is history.
So after proving to the world the power of these Drazeldar and their loyalty to him, Kordaava announced to Tiamir and to the ruling class of Latium as well, that he was going to, he announced his plan to take over all of Chaldea and to rule it as an emperor, and thanked them for, letting him run their armies, but now, henceforth, he was going to be in charge. And one reason he was able to pull this off is because he was thinking of a worldwide emperor. The Tiamir wasn't really going to lose any power. He was going to remain in command. He was going to remain the Grand Prince of Bruges, and the aristocracy of Bruges and Latium would remain in place. It's just that they would then report to him as independent kingdoms of his empire. And they kind of saw the writing on the wall and went for this, and so it happened. With these Drazeldar as his new super powerful sentinels, and built on the backbone of this army of Bruges and Latium, kingdom after kingdom of Chaldea fell under his might.
So after he conquered the world, the coronation is very interesting. I now control everything. And rather than going back to his home in Nogstadt, he decided to stay in Saratov, which I'm sure was some sort of give and take negotiations he had with Tiramir, and ended up making Saratov his capital, where he built his palace.
Yeah, that's the way I always thought about it too, is that part of what Tiramir got out of the deal was that his kingdom would have the capital city of the entire empire in it. So a pretty big economic opportunity for him, his family, and his country folk. And so, Kordaava, after conquering the world, Kordaava organized a coronation ceremony to become emperor formally, accept the reins, if you will. And during the height of this coronation ceremony, at the appropriate time, the Ma'at deity Set came down from the heavens, or up from below, whichever way it works for Set being the god of evil, and ascended Kordaava to the ranks of the divine, made him a demigod of Set.
Yeah, he spent 1,000 primal point base to give Kordaava 100 per primal base.
That's right. Yeah.
Sorry, I got Gabriel there for a second.
Yeah. The primal order rules kicked in. We had to have an ascension somewhere in our story. And Hulsan was appointed to be the head of the Church of Set, and as part of all of this, the Church of Set was made the official state religion of the Kordaavan Empire, and except for a couple of exceptions, the worship of all other deities was made illegal.
There was rounds of applause everywhere, I'm sure.
Yeah.
No.
I'm sure everything went really smoothly after that. No, I think there were probably some uprisings. Might have been a few deaths involved. Yeah. But he was the emperor. He wasn't a real nice guy. Yeah, we're
not in the early days, probably.
Yeah.
But once he had everything under control, then he could turn on the charm.
Yeah. But it's typical emperor stuff. Hard to be that powerful and everybody like you. But it wasn't a democracy. It was not a popularity contest, and he was an emperor, so he did that. We had a couple of exceptions. We mentioned that there were a couple of exceptions to the worship of the Church of Set. The two best known examples are the Kingdom of Akkadia. The Kingdom of Akkadia was ruled by priestesses of Ishtar, a Babylonian goddess of war and fertility. And Set and Ishtar have some sort of alliance between the two of them. And part of getting Ishtar to support this this move by Set to have one of his demigods take over this plane, Set, of course, had to give up something, and he agreed to allow the worship of Ishtar to continue in the Kingdom of Akkadia. He also appointed the free city of Esh. That's in one of your stories coming up, isn't it, Steve?
Well, Zane goes to the University of Dorseng in the free city of Esh, where there's free religion. It's all free. It's wonderful. So, yeah, I won't give away too much, but we spend a bit of time in seeing how freedom of religion works.
Yes. Yeah, so there is, Esh is an interesting city, kind of a chaotic city, because you have from all over Chaldea people who weren't too interested in giving up their religious beliefs because of the emperor said to, moving to Esh. Now, Esh is also the capital city of Dorseng, which is a Celtic-inspired kingdom, and you can imagine how a lot of the locals might feel about all these religious people from all these other gods moving in. Yeah, it's a tough place to live if you're religious.
There's a few theories floating around at the time. We're thinking that the reason why Kordaava allowed one place on the planet where everybody could go to and have freedom of religion was that he was basically like a big magnet to get all the real zealots all to move there. Anybody who was really, 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 truly into religion wouldn't have a problem giving up their home country or kingdom to move to Dorseng. And then eventually they would all be huddled together in one spot, and he could just nuke them from orbit to be sure. That's a theory. It never actually happened.
Yeah, but, maybe it was on the docket for the future, but
because nobody could understand why he actually would allow one city in all of the world to have freedom of religion. Yeah, so we've already mentioned the Kordaava love structure. He fell in love with the whole imperial Roman legionnaire structure of militaries and whatnot, and that came down to rules of law as well. When he took over the world as the emperor, one thing he didn't want to do is he didn't want to just rule by fiat and run around and enforce laws themselves. He actually wanted to set laws that everybody everything to run well-oiled machine. That was his goal. And so he created a whole set of imperial laws that he pushed out around the world. And he ended up engraving them on the obelisks of law. So, Peter, those are all based upon the Hammurabi. How do you pronounce that?
Hammurabi.
Hammurabi. There we go.
Yeah,
sorry, I know I'll butcher things.
I was always kind of a big fan of Hammurabi. I think 3,000 years BC or whatever created. The Code of Hammurabi is one of the earliest recorded sets of laws. So yeah, I thought it'd be fun if Kordaava did something else. But of course, he's the demigod of an Egyptian god. So obelisks are constructed in every kingdom. In the main courthouse of that kingdom, there is an obelisk that's been built out in front of that courthouse that has all the laws that Kordaava decreed inscribed into the obelisk.
In some of our stories, when we show Egyptian, in Chaldea they're called Mayat, architecture places, you'll see these obelisks. A lot of times the town crier will be belting out the early morning news, and he'll be standing in front of the obelisk of law, sort of a foundation stone for the news of the day. So keep your eye out for those sort of things.
Kordaava also established he had to create an imperial form of government, since he didn't inherit an empire that already existed. And once again, tapping into the influence that from the Contubernium and the culture of Latium, which is our Rome-inspired kingdom, he created a Senate. And the Senate would be composed of all the key rulers of all the kingdoms of Chaldea. So kings and queens, Koenigs and Koningans, and Jarls and Patesi, Merriks and Merikas, and a bunch of others that
even
pharaohs.
We were talking about the clan chieftains from the Orc kingdoms.
Orc chieftains. The head honchos of every kingdom. And in the bigger kingdoms, it wouldn't just be one or two, maybe it was 3 or 4 or 5 people even, to kind of go into the second rung of the power structure of that kingdom. And
the challenge though is that, there's like 450 senators or something crazy like that. And those guys could get together and, have grand debates over like theory and whatnot. But he knew he needed some feet on the ground getting shit done.
Yes, he did. And so the Senate was great for doing complex trade agreements, improved communication between kingdoms and treaties. But to run the empire day to day, the Kordaava appointed a council of consuls. And these consuls were appointed by the Senate. And in Kordaava's view, the most important job of the Senate was to appoint these consuls. And there was 20-some departments, if you will. And these departments covered all the different aspects of governance required by Kordaava's new government. And each of these departments was ruled by a consul. And these, and part of, to be a consul, you had to be a member of the Senate. and you had to agree to move to Saratov and live in Saratov so that you could be available to conduct the day-to-day business of administering the empire.
It's quite a group of personalities in the Council of Consuls.
I think one of my favorite pieces of art, which I will show you here, you can see this is the Council of Consuls. You might notice that there is a dragon hovering above them. There's a dragon on the Council of Consuls, and he is the court magician, if you will. The Grand Vizier of Kordaavan Empire is a dragon named Laufroth. More to come.
Yes, dun dun dun.
Dun, dun, dun. We will not forget about him. We will not.
Laufroth will end up playing a big part. Yes.
Laufroth definitely has some opinions about how the empire should proceed.
Being as that he's an elder dragon.
Yeah.
And thinks Chaldea should belong to dragons. Also, Holsan, being the Minbet of Set, also has a seat on the console. We were mentioned Tiamir also has a seat on. And then there's
Tiamir is the chairman of the council. He chairs the Council of Consuls.
And then there's other things, just like the Council of Taxation and the Council of Seafarers or whatever. You can point to our website. Maybe we'll have them all listed there at some point.
Yeah. Oh, wouldn't that be exciting?
Geek data for.
Yeah. So another thing that Kordaava did was establish an imperial calendar. Now, before Kordaava and Kordaava's empire, every kingdom kept track of their own calendar in terms of what happened in what years, and all sorts of different ways. Different kingdoms, every kingdom would do it differently. Some would be like, well, in the 7th year of the reign of so and so. Well, who was so and so, and was it so and so the first or so and so the second? Et cetera, et cetera. Some people track years based on religious events. The elves track years based on the number of rings in the world tree. Things like this, right? Kordaava came along. It's like, okay, this is really confusing. It's a layer of complexity on all historical research and treaties. No, we need to have a standardized calendar. So he created, of course, he liked to name things after himself. So he created the Kordaavan calendar. And the Kordaavan calendar is very simple. The 0 point is his ascension, his coronation when he became emperor. That's point 0. Everything is measured in years after that point, or historical events are measured in years before that event. So he did that.
He died in year 41. Yes. I do believe.
Yes.
So he made it to year 41. I don't know if the calendars are going to change. Another bit about the calendar we're going to mention about the calendars. He created the calendar. I mean, we talk about the Numian spirits, which are spirit constellations in the sky. The basis for everything. I mean, a lot of people were in agreement. The basis for every day of the week. I mean, the weeks are the weeks of the different Anumian. There's 52 major Anumians. In this aspect, all the calendars were the same because the Anumians up there floating around, manifesting in a specific order each week and every year in, year after. So this part everybody agreed on. It was just how to number the years that people disagreed on. And so the Anumian part of the calendar has always been there. So the other thing that Kordaava did was there was, of course, because Chaldea was this world at war. The wars all for 1,000 years during the dark times. And a lot of these wars, of course, left questions about which kingdoms owned which land and where the borders were between various kingdoms. Even the word kingdom wasn't something that everybody used to refer to themselves as some sort of state. So during the Kingdom Unification Act of Year 2, Kordaava rolled out his plan for exactly where all the borders were between all the kingdoms. And part of his idea was that every square foot of Chaldea was in a kingdom, and that kingdom was ruled by someone or somebody, and this body was represented in the Senate. So he created a structure
at the top of him, the Senate, and then the land divided up into kingdoms.
Yeah, he went around and said, yeah, these are exactly the borders, exactly. There's no more border skirmishes. This is exactly the way it's going to be. And we told each kingdom, yeah, you're controlling this area. There were even some areas that crazy wild places where people didn't want to control. It's like, no, every square inch is accounted for and controlled.
Yes.
Even
if you don't want to control that area, I'll find someone who will.
Yes. Everything was accounted for, and so that made things nice and neat. Again, he liked things nice and neat and organized.
You might say he was lawful.
He was very lawful.
Lawful evil, perhaps, as some might speculate.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a little side stories about kingdoms that people wonder, well, why is this place called a kingdom? I don't know. We'll talk about the Greymory Wastes. With the word wastes on the end, you're like, well, how is this wasteland a kingdom?
This may not be a very productive kingdom. It may not be a kingdom that pays a lot of taxes. It may not feel much of a military, but somebody's responsible for it. And if things happening in that area are getting out of control for the neighbors, somebody's going to answer for it.
Well, and it's kind of funny. Eventually, those sort of places also, there always tended to be a castrum, a legion castrum somewhere nearby, where the legion would, keep things organized.
Another thing that Kordaava did after forming his kingdom was he had to address the situation of money, currency, debt, that stuff. And as you would expect, most every kingdom had its own way of doing money, whether they had currency and coins like Hesser and Melius, or the dwarves would take their metal and make it into rings and thread it in their beards, or like the kingdom of Andalus, which just had this huge network of promissory notes where you just like, oh, I owe you money, I'll just write it down and give it to you. Now you have a slip that shows that I owe you money. And once a year they'd all get together and reconcile. So Kordaava realized that this would be a difficult thing to change because it's so ingrained into the entire culture. And so what he did was he said, every kingdom, okay, keep doing what you're doing, but I'm going to create a standard. So he created what's called the Emperor's Gold Standard, Emperor's Gold Sovereign. The Emperor's Gold Sovereign is not so much a coin as it is a brick. It's literally a brick of gold with intricate designs and precise weight. And it's not used in a lot. You don't take an Emperor's Gold Sovereign down to the local bar and buy an ale with it. It's mainly used in banking or international debts and so on and so forth. But what he did is he set out an exchange rate in every kingdom for what their currencies were relative to the Emperor's Gold Sovereign. And he would use the exchange rates as a way to provide incentives for proper behavior as a kingdom. He would use the exchange rates to influence local economies to behave closer to the norms that he established.
I remember, early 80s. I get introduced to Chaldea. I'd played D&D, and of course D&D has gold, silver, copper, generic coins. I remember when I got introduced to Chaldea, they were like trading gold sovereigns, and as soon as I heard gold sovereign, it just carried more weight. Pardon the pun. It just, something about gold sovereigns was just like, wow, gold sovereigns, yes, got to get more gold sovereigns. Yeah, tip of the hat to your ability to create wonderful flavor.
Thank you.
Well, here's the funny thing. So we eventually ended up taking it really crazy. We ended up actually creating and graphically designing the gold sovereign. We even got a hold of our friend in Europe and had them create hieroglyphs to
yes,
put.
we have an Egyptologist on staff, Finnish, finishing Egyptologist, and she designed our gold sovereign for us and all the hieroglyphs that go on it. We wrote out what we wanted it to say. We wrote it out in English, and she translated it for us. And in the process, we actually ended up inventing a hieroglyph for Emperor Kordaava. And yep, there it is. I circled it on the little graphic. Yep, that's Kordaava right there as a hieroglyph. Yeah,
it's on our website too if you want to check it out on Kordaava's entry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a wonderful gold bar. I mean, I want a gold bar, but man, I really want that gold bar.
Yeah, me too. I love it. It seems like a simple little thing, but I love the gold sovereign. Yeah, it's fun. We had a lot of fun designing. We kind of went down a geek rabbit hole on that one.
Okay, Kordaava's love life. Wow. Yeah, he was a playboy, right?
Well, he was an emperor. Yeah, so he was slow to settle down, you might say. In fact, he never married. He had many lovers early on. The most well-known lover of his was a genie by the name of Tanil. And Tanil, and of course, by the various lovers, Kordaava had a number of bastard children. The only child that Kordaava ever recognized as official part of the family with a title was his daughter by Tanil named Leon.
By the way, sort of important to note here, he never actually put her as his heir, being as he was, quote, an immortal demigod. He didn't have a line of succession, which I'm mentioning this because, well, he gets killed.
Right.
And people say, well, obviously Leanne being his daughter is the next in line. Is like, is she?
Yeah, what are the rules of peerage for an empire that didn't exist before 40 years ago?
And was ruled by an immortal god who's really not immortal because he died.
Right.
And, never expected to die, never wrote out. Yeah.
Peerage was never covered in the foundation documents of the empire.
I suspect we'll be exploring more of that.
Yes, and also the other potential claim is that he was betrothed, even though he never married. He was betrothed. As part of this, we mentioned earlier that there was a relationship, an alliance of some sort between Set and Ishtar. There was this expectation that Set's demigod on Chaldea, Kordaava, and the Ishtar's demigod on Chaldea, Iltani, that the two of them would marry. And so, indeed,
I would think that's water seeking its own level there.
So indeed, they got engaged, but the marriage never actually happened. It was always going to happen, but it was never. The engagement was never canceled, but it was never consummated, you might say, either. So that's also a lingering question about potential succession.
Well, and Iltani is, as a Patricia of Acadia, is also a senator, and she makes frequent trips. Well, I don't know how frequent, but she makes trips to Saratov.
Yes.
I'm sure, being as she was the one betrothed to Kordaava, she'll let that be known.
Yes. We will eventually spend the appropriate time on these topics. But in the beginning of our story, we're following these other characters, and we will cycle toward the center eventually. Well, as we draw to a close, we've opened up this topic of what's going to happen with the Empire. Without giving any spoilers at this point in time, certainly we can share some of the suspicions, some of the questions that are floating around within the Empire. We already mentioned that there'll be certainly those who think that Leanne, his daughter, because she was the only child that was recognized, that maybe she will have some sort of claim to the throne. There's also the question of Iltani and whether she, as his betrothed, what sort of place she might try and make for the throne. There's also his old friend Tiomir. At the beginning of our story, we talked about how Tiomir Bogoslav had hired Kordaava to be in charge of his militaries, had been a key ally of Kordaava during his rise to power, and then became the chair of the Council of Consuls, who and still held that position when Kordaava was assassinated, and will be certainly a key political figure as things move on.
Well, by the way, there's also the 900-pound gorilla. I mean, who's controlling the Drazdar?
Yes.
There's 100 of them out there, and they reported, well, apparently they reported directly to him.
The one that was at the at Enchantment's Guard has left its post.
Exit stage left.
Yes, it was abandoned its post. Yep. There's also his legions. So Kordaava had 20 Imperial legions that he stationed throughout Chaldea at various places, potential trouble spots, generally near the capitals of the more powerful kingdoms of Chaldea.
And he also liked a flat management hierarchy, is right. So, right. Those guys have reported directly to him. Right? It wasn't like there was this huge military thing and structure and middle management. It was like the legatus, Kordaava.
Yes, that's exactly right. There is all these legions. The legati who ran these legions considered Kordaava as their commander.
In some parts of the world, the legatus were almost kings in their own right.
Oh, very definitely. Yeah, very definitely.
Yeah, and then the things that are all being held down that Kordaava kept down, we always call it whack-a-mole. He'd keep things, these different people, things, powers, creatures, who knows what. Definitely the orcs and niche. Yeah, with his death, there'll be what's out there.
Exactly.
Kordaava really dead? Test the waters when they don't get beat back. Whoa.
Yeah, we've been talking about the question of legal succession. There are other factions who don't really care about the legalities of succession, just like, oh, Kordaava has been keeping me in line for the last 40 years, and now he's dead. And that seems like as good a place as any to wrap up this segment on Emperor Marcosta Kordaava. He, even though he dies at the opening of our story, his presence will loom large throughout the coming seasons. Everywhere. This story will be told in many ways in the shadow of his death.
Sin vigor and soldiers.
You're here at last.
Better not be a goddamn surprise party.